other side over by...
Let me ask you about that.
Yeah.
You know, the thinking is that the Revolutionary War was fought by about a third of the populace, supported by about a third, opposed by about a third, and a third was somewhere in the middle. And that's about right from what I've read. I mean, we even had militia in South Carolina and some parts of Alabama and some of the cotton-growing states who rose up against the colonists fighting colonists, you know, because they said, well, we don't care what's going on in Boston. We're selling cotton to Britain, and we're perfectly fine with it. But anyway, do you buy that today? I mean, I have said that I think, and maybe I'm wrong, that about 30, 35, 40% of the American people really cherish liberty, and then so many others don't think about it or don't care about it, and may not care about it till it's too late. Do you think that's about right?
Yeah, I do. And it's actually a message that I think is not only accurate, but it's something that should give us hope. Mm-hmm. We have to remind ourselves, if we're always comparing ourselves against an impossible standard, believing that everyone has to agree with us, then we will fail and we'll be miserable doing it. If we believe that we necessarily even have to have a significant supermajority or even a simple majority, we don't. We don't have to have everyone. We don't even necessarily always need a majority of all people. We just have to have enough. Now, that's what they did in Philadelphia in 1787 when the first few delegates arrived. They didn't have everyone. They eventually had enough to at least get started. They didn't have everyone on board at the time of the Revolution, but they had enough, roughly a third. Today, it's never been more important than it is right now to have enough on the side of liberty. As long as we speak with a clear voice, with a consistent message, and a message that sings, that resonates to the undeniable rights that accompany the dignity of the individual human soul, we can win. We can win this. But we've got to be on the same page. And we've got to bring on a few converts along the way. We've got to bring on some people who don't even realize that they like liberty as much as they ultimately will. And you know what? Something's interesting, Mark. Mm-hmm. I don't think there has ever been a time in my lifetime more ideal than right now for finding consensus on this. We got a couple of big groups of people in America. Well, one big group who helped elect Donald Trump to be president, and they did so because they wanted things to change in Washington. They wanted the swamp to be drained. For them, it's an easy sell to say we've got to shift power away from Washington back to the people. But then we've got another big group of people who supported Hillary Clinton. They didn't want to drain the swamp. They wanted Hillary Clinton as president. But now that President Trump's in power, they're suspicious of the federal government in ways that they never have been before. Those two people can provide us with some overlap that really can bring us liberty, bring us to a point where we're ready to restore both federalism and separation of powers in ways that no one would have predicted even just a few years ago. These are unique times. We have a uniquely exquisite moment that's upon us. All that we need is for more Americans to be singing the song of liberty.
Do you think, to your point, that when I look at sanctuary cities and this sort of thing, do you think it's more a convenience? Do you think it's more ends justify the means? In other words, sure, we'll support federalism if we can get our result. Now, you and I don't believe that, but as a rule, no, we're not going to support state authority and so forth. I find the left bounces back and forth for political convenience.
Sure.
So they support sanctuary cities today. I've said we ought to have sanctuary Second Amendment cities. Okay, fine. They have their sanctuary, just tongue-in-cheek. And how would that go down? In other words, if states or cities said, you know what, we'll follow the Second Amendment, we'll embrace the Second Amendment, we don't care what you say in Washington, D.C., they wouldn't get away with that, would they?
No, no.
And yet sanctuary cities, effectively, they do get away with that.
Right.
Okay, so, which brings me to another point, and then I want to ask you about Mercy Otis Warren. Are we living in a period now that's a little scary with the kind of lawlessness that's going on? Whether it's federal judges, that's not new, but what they did in the president's executive order is new. I'd not seen that before. Taking a campaign statement and then projecting it in, and we have almost 500 sanctuary cities and states that have basically thumbed their nose at the federal government. I call these neo-Confederate states and cities. They would hate it, which is why I call them that. And then they're nullifiers. You know, the left used to oppose nullification, but they're the nullifiers. What do you make of all this?
Those are interesting times. And look, it's not just faux federalism, it's almost the opposite of federalism. Part of what makes federalism work is that we agree through our Constitution that certain things are going to be decided federally and other things will not. Those that are not will be left to the states respectively or to the people. One of the things that is federal, unambiguously so under the Constitution, involve things dealing with immigration and naturalization. That is a federal thing. So they can't wave the flag of federalism and saying they want to be sanctuary cities to the extent that what they're trying to do is undermine responsibility that is unequivocally one that is assigned to the federal government. The other interesting thing here is that those efforts to crack down on sanctuary cities end up being tied to federal funding. In other words, if a police department that is receiving federal funding under some of these proposals decides to be a sanctuary city, they'll lose some of that. That could, quite oddly enough, end up bringing about more federalism. If we got more of the federal government out of what is supposed to be local, and if we allowed the federal government to focus on what is undeniably, unambiguously federal, we'd be in a much better place. The lawlessness you describe with these judges is a scary thing. You and I are both what I think I would describe as textualists, originalists. We believe that judges should look at the law based on what it says, rather than on the basis of what they wish it said. And when a judge looks at this and says, I know that the text of the executive order appears to be consistent with the President's authority under Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act. And I know that on the face of it, it doesn't discriminate religiously, but we're nonetheless going to review this executive order in light of things that we think the President might have meant on the campaign trail a year or two ago. Mm-hmm. That's scary. That's overstepping the judicial bounds, and that's one of the reasons why I think these court orders are going to be overturned.
And it is at the court, and the court's moving at breakneck speed because it's time for vacation, among other things. Could we potentially even get a unanimous court on this?
I think it's possible, because I think if they look at the law based on what it says.
On their own decision.
On their own decisions and on the basis of what the law actually says, I think that's exactly what will happen.
It just amazes me that you have a Fourth Circuit, what was it, 11-3, something like that? You have the Ninth Circuit, Obama appointed 40% of the federal judges that are out there.
Yes.
It's incredible.
It is. Now, the Fourth Circuit a few years ago
was solid.
Was solid. It was a bastion of textualism. It was a court that prided itself on being straight down the line. We call it as we see it. The Ninth Circuit, as you're aware,
always crazy,
has long been a problem child within the federal judiciary. So that part's less surprising.
The D.C. Circuit was too, and they added 3 seats or 2 seats.
Yes.
And just unbelievable what they did and what they got away with. I mean, if that's not court packing, I don't know what is. Let's talk about Mercy Otis Warren. You said that she was the wife of James Otis?
Yes.
Tell us about her.
Mercy Otis Warren was a close friend of John Adams and also something of a protege of his. She was a playwright, she was an author, a polemicist. She was someone who was well known in Revolution era America. She was extremely well spoken, much more outspoken than most women of her era, and extremely well educated. She was a patriot. She understood that there's this tenuous relationship between human liberty and government. On the one hand, we need government to protect us from each other and from those on the outside who would do us harm. On the other hand, she understood that whenever government acts, it does so at the expense of our individual liberty. And so we should carefully cabin what we authorize government to do. Reminds me of this movie I saw when I was a kid, where there's this tyrannical king who, in a fit of rage one day, said, "That's it, I'm canceling Christmas." My immediate thought when I saw that as a kid was, well, why would they ever give the king the power to decide whether or not there's Christmas? That shouldn't be a king thing. Mercy Otis Warren probably could have written something like that had she foreseen our time. She did foresee our time in the sense that she wrote extensively in reaction to what was being proposed as the Constitution, and said, hey, this might not be all fun and games. This could be dangerous. She predicted that we could end up with a sort of monarchy in miniature, as we would have people elected from the various states to come to Congress and serve there, forgetting their home states and their home constituencies. She worried about the excessive blending of power between the legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch, how that could be distorted. She worried that there were not sufficient protections in the Constitution to protect the people against tyranny. And she worried about the absence of a Bill of Rights, worried perhaps as much as anything else about the inadequate protection for state sovereignty, state authority.
She was an anti-federalist?
Yeah.